I want to bring in Dr. Nick Maynard, who is a gastrointestinal surgeon based in the UK. He's made several trips to volunteer in Gaza since the war began. He's just returned from Nasser Hospital. Thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Maynard. Let's start with what sorts of injuries and illnesses that you were treating during your time in Gaza, and what were the humanitarian conditions like where you were in Khan Yunis?
Thank you for inviting me on. The humanitarian conditions were awful. I mean, I saw many mass casualties, many injuries, but the underlying narrative behind all of this was the appalling effects of malnutrition, the forced starvation that we've been hearing about. There were everyday mass casualties with explosive injuries from bombs, but also a really distressing number of gunshot wounds inflicted on predominantly young teenage boys at the food distribution sites, the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation food distribution sites. And these were terrible injuries inflicted on these young teenage boys, often only 11, 12, 13, and multiple traumas every day. But as I said, the underlying narrative behind all of this is the appalling malnutrition, which led to a far higher mortality rate from these injuries than we would normally expect.
And forced starvation, as you called it, I know that you'd told other outlets that, as you were mentioning, that those young boys, that it seemed like they were being targeted, though the IDF has repeatedly denied that it intentionally targets civilians. But from your perspective, that is what it looked like when you were there.
Yes, and on my previous trips to Gaza, we've all seen, and you will be aware of many American doctors who've been out in Gaza. All of us have reported repeatedly over the last 22 months clear evidence that we see of direct targeting of civilians, and direct targeting of many children. We've all seen babies, toddlers with bullet wounds to their heads, and on this trip, the gunshot wounds I saw in these young teenage boys, the clustering of the injuries to different body parts on different days was so striking that it's inconceivable it could have been coincidence. We saw multiple people on one particular day coming in with gunshot wounds to the head, the next day gunshot wounds to the neck, the next day to the chest. On one day, 2 weeks ago yesterday, we had 4 young teenage boys come in, all of whom had been shot in the testicles. The clustering was so striking, it was beyond coincidence.
Dr. Maynard, those are really, really tough details to hear you report, but they need to be spoken about and shared. So thank you for sharing that with us. You've been to Gaza several times, as you said. It's been more than a year and a half. How have conditions on the ground there changed over that time from what you've seen?
They've deteriorated hugely. Every time I go to Gaza, and I've been going to Gaza for 15 years, but as you say, this is my 3rd trip since October 2023. And each time I go, I think I'll be ready for it. I think I'll be prepared for it. Not only because I know Gaza so well, but also because I've had daily contact throughout all that time with my friends and colleagues there. So I always imagine I'm going to be prepared for it. But each time I visited, and that was particularly striking on this most recent trip, every time it's much worse than I expected. And the conditions that I witnessed with my own eyes over the 4 weeks I was there until just a few days ago, the humanitarian conditions are unfathomable. It's almost impossible to put into words how terrible the situation is. Patients dying of malnutrition. My friends and colleagues who I've known for years, some of them I barely recognized as they'd lost so much weight. One surgeon I know had lost 30 kilograms in weight. Friends of mine have been killed there. I spent quite a bit of time on the pediatric unit because I had patients on the pediatric intensive care unit and saw such severe malnutrition in newborn babies, in infants, in other children, that it defies description. And in the early part of my stay there, 4 premature newborn babies died entirely of malnutrition because they were premature. Their mothers were so malnourished themselves they couldn't breastfeed, and we had no formula feed to give these babies. And it's worth pointing out that I was working for a period of time with some American doctors who were out there volunteering like me, and they had brought in formula feed for newborn babies, for infants, because they knew there was a shortage. And every single carton of formula feed that they brought in was confiscated, was taken away from them at the border by Israeli border guards, and very specifically formula feed. They weren't confiscating other things, it was just the formula feed. I cannot imagine why, but there has been no formula feed, for example, going into Gaza for many months now.
Wow. And again, I keep going back to what you called earlier forced starvation. Israel says that it's now coordinating with the United Nations and other humanitarian organizations to take what it's calling a daily tactical pause in parts of Gaza that include aid distribution sites. Do you think that this will help to alleviate some of the suffering that we've been discussing, or do you think that it's just insufficient?
Well, at the moment it's talk and nothing else, so I will believe it when it happens. We welcome any aid, any food going in, but what you have described, what they have described, which of course hasn't happened yet, is all talk, will still be a drop in the ocean to what is really required. They need, and it's worth bearing in mind that before October 2023, 500 trucks every single day went into Gaza to deliver essential aid, medical supplies and food. We have not been anywhere near that in the last 22 months. So the aid they're talking about at the moment, which of course has not gone in, will still only be a drop in the ocean. We welcome everything, but far more than that is needed.
And Dr. Maynard, we're just about out of time, but is there anything else that you think that viewers out there need to know, should know from your own perspective, what you have seen as you've been there on the ground in Gaza?
I've described some of the horrors, the deliberate targeting of hospitals. I've been in hospitals that have been sustained missile attacks by the Israeli military. They have not just bombed hospitals, they have systematically dismantled the whole infrastructure of the healthcare system in Gaza. They have targeted and killed more than 1,500 healthcare workers. Friends of mine have been killed. They have abducted more than 400 healthcare workers, many of whom have been tortured, some of them been tortured to death. This is a deliberate targeting of the healthcare system and healthcare personnel, the like of which I've certainly never witnessed before and never heard of before. And the world needs to know what is going on. This is entirely preventable if our governments, the Western governments, could stop the Israelis doing that, and they are failing to do so.
Dr. Nick Maynard, we appreciate you so much for being with us and for all that you have done and continue to do. Thank you so much.